I'm gonna introduce you guys, and then I'm gonna let you go next. Okay.
Okay, great.
So good evening, everybody. I'm so glad that we're here tonight. Next on the mic, and you guys can see I'm in a different environment. So I want to make sure that I introduce everybody here. We have some great gentlemen on this platform today. We have Mr. Hamilton. He's from the DC Police Department, but he's also part of an organization for Black law enforcement. We have Mr. Chief. We're gonna have Chief Lando here. He's our new Frederick Chief. I'm so happy that you're here tonight. And we have the Vanguard Justice. Give it to me, Twitter.
Vanguard
Vanguard
Justice
Justice
Society.
Society.
The Justice Society. He is the president of Vanguard
I'm
in,
not
in
the
Baltimore.
president.
Yeah, so so I should have known that. I shouldn't have messed that up. So we're gonna let the chief go first and give him a little background about yourself, Chief, and tell us why you're on the show. And I'm so excited that you're gonna be here.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. My name is Jason Lando, and I am the new police chief for Frederick. Take it easy on me because I've been chief for 3 days. I'm still getting the lay of the land. But so far, everyone's been amazing, very welcoming, the community and the officers. Prior to that, I served 21 years with the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police in Pennsylvania, where my last rank was as the commander. And for 5 of those years, I oversaw a police precinct in Pittsburgh. We call them zones, where there was just a lot of tension between the police and the community. I didn't like what I saw, and I wanted to really work to change that dynamic. So it's an honor to be here tonight because community policing is something I think is very important. And I appreciate the invitation to come and share some of my thoughts and philosophies on how we do it. So thank you.
Okay, we're gonna let Mr. Hampton go first next. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. My name is Ronald Hampton. I'm a retired DC Metropolitan Police officer. I served in the Metropolitan Police Department for almost 24 years. When I retired from the police department, I also served as the executive director of the National Black Police Association till 2010. I've taught at the university level here at the University of District of Columbia, and I've been in a variety of jobs and positions since then that I've just had a variety of experiences. I should tell you that I served on the police department from 1970 to 1994, and for the last 8 years, I worked for one of the collaboratives in the city as a family support worker, working with families. I also I have 3 schools that I work in. And I'm still very much a part of law enforcement and the criminal justice system. Presently, I'm serving on the DC Police Reform Commission. We've been in existence since August, and our mandate to deliver our recommendations is April the 1st, 2021.
Okay, so and I'm gonna ask you guys if you're not speaking to mute because my tech person said I have an echo coming out. So if you're not speaking, just mute it. Mr. Lando, I think you took yourself off, not mute.
Yeah.
Okay, and last but not least, we have Mr. Shorter.
Take it off of me. Jeff Short, I'm a commander with the Baltimore Police Department. I've been with the Police Department in Baltimore for 28 years. I've been a commander of the Community Collaboration Division, where we were the primary unit for community engagement in Baltimore City. I'm a member of the Vanguard Justice Society. We have a president. Her name is Natalie Preston. Oh man, community has been my pet peeve for quite some years. And my goal and task has been to re-engage with the community to develop and rebuild those platforms that we used to have when I first came on. When we had the uprising in 2014, it really shed a light on a lot of the issues that the Baltimore Police Department had, I guess, swept under the rug. But the community brought it to our attention in a very meaningful and intentional way, that we had no choice but to pay attention. One of my greatest mentor was Melvin Russell, and one of his sayings was, for years and years and years, we banged on the community like as if we were a hammer and they were a nail. Well, 2014 flipped this upside down, and then we had to start pulling out the community what we wanted from them, as opposed to giving them what we thought that they should need or have. I'm just thankful that Ms. Thrasher has allowed me to share my presence on this platform tonight, and I guess we'll have a wonderful show. I look forward to working with you gentlemen now, maybe in the future as well.
So I would like to just, Mr. Hampton was part of a platform that the NAACP had on, and he was very knowledgeable. So I reached out to him before this. Mr. Shorter is my mentor, and so he's taught me everything I know about community engagement, a lot of things. I still text him every now and then, be like, hey, I need some help with some things. And so he's very he's right there when I need some help. And Chief Lando, I'm just looking forward to working with you in the community. And I'm very involved in the community, and hopefully you gentlemen can coordinate together to bring Frederick in a great direction. And I strategically put you guys on the show together. I'm always strategic in some ways. So let's get to the questions. So I did send everybody. I did send the questions in advance. And if you would like to ask some questions, you are more than welcome to ask some questions. Please share so we can get it out to the community, because I think this is going to be a great discussion. Okay, so law enforcement has been targeted globally lately. And why and how do you feel we have arrived to this place where we have a lot of protests, activism, and legislative bills being passed against law enforcement? So I'm gonna let all you guys answer, but I'm gonna let Chief Lando go first, and so you can go ahead and answer.
Yeah, I think Mr. Shorter hit the nail on the head. For a long time, we've policed communities the way we think they should be policed, and not necessarily the way they want to be policed, right? All communities are different, and different communities, certain things fly and certain things don't. And when we treat ourselves as the hammer, as Mr. Shorter said, and the community as the nail, that's only gonna be accepted for so long. And then you start to see these incidents, right, all across the country. And I do think that in Minneapolis, that was the absolute breaking point. That was the absolute tipping point. And I think it was because it was so egregious, and that finally people said, we've had enough. And, I want to preface my comments by saying that I really believe that police officers, 99% of police officers get up every day and they go to work and they want to do the right thing. They want to serve the community. I don't remember ever getting up saying, like, I want to take someone to jail today. I want to use force on somebody. But I think the way we have, as organizations, police communities, hasn't always been the best for the community, and we've landed ourselves now in a situation where we're the ones that are under the gun. I feel bad for the officers, and obviously for the community, but I also feel bad for the officers that continue to get up every day and go to work and want to do the right thing, and now their job is that much more difficult because of some of the things that have happened in the past. So I think that's how we arrived here today, and I think, like I said, Mr. Shorter really put that into a much more concise statement than I could have. The hammer and nail theory. Thank you.
And I agree. I really think that the bad officers make it really hard for the good officers to do their job. And like you said, they don't wake up wanting to arrest someone, but it happens. I also think that it's made a big that big expression or that piece of people being able to record now. Right? Like, we know this has been going on for a long time, but people have not been able to record, right, with their own phones. So it's out in the open, and then it came to us during COVID. It was kind of like that whole like we had time to marinate on what happened. So Chief Lando, you had mentioned Shorter numerous of times. So I'm gonna let Shorter go first. I'm gonna let Shorter go next. Go ahead, Shorter.
All right, so I think law enforcement has had a trouble keeping up with the systemic issues of today's society. Social media, I believe, has played a significant role in the education and miseducation on law enforcement. It appears that the pendulum swing from the elder statesmen and stateswomen to younger, more progressive politicians has played a huge part in the ongoing legislative process regarding law enforcement. I think the labeling and stigma placed upon law enforcement today is both warranted and unwarranted. The law enforcement profession, like Chief said, is primarily comprised of men and women who truly have a heart for service. I think the negative actions of some have overshadowed the positive body work of many in law enforcement today. It's a huge underground movement to change the democracy that we all take for granted. And it appears to me that human emotion has been manipulated in some cases. And I like to refer back to this saying, like you, like in between the sunrise and the sunset, we all want the same thing, and we want to be safe and secure in our own communities. It's at the core of what being a U.S. citizen is all about. This protest, the activism, has resulted because people have been smothered. And I learned very quickly that when you hush someone, that action will permeate in a myriad of different ways. Some people will cry, some people will laugh, but some people just have an outburst. And in 2014, Baltimore City had its outburst. Whether it was Freddie Gray, whether it was George Floyd, whether it was Breonna Taylor, everyone has a breaking point. And it's to the point now where everyone across the nation and the world has reached their breaking point. I do believe that some of the stuff that we go through is revenge related because some of the young politicians grew up seeing things that happened to their family members. So now they have an opportunity to, I guess, get back what they felt they lost years ago. Some officers do make it harder than others. But for the most part, like the chief, like I refer back to the chief again, we all come to work with a heart of service, and not to cause anyone any damage or hurt anyone because we have people just like everyone else. And a lot of people in Baltimore City, I have a lot of family live in Baltimore City. So I don't go to work looking to hurt anybody. The people that work for me don't come to work looking to hurt anybody. Force is an ugly sight, and people just don't want to realize, or they have a difficult time recognizing when you're taking someone's freedom. It's a difficult sight to see, and I think, and when we come to the place where we can finally understand both sides, I think we'll that middle ground is what we all strive for daily.
And Mr. Hampton, you're next. Go ahead and give us your intake on that question. You got to unmute yourself. Yep. There you go.
I agree with everything that the chief and the commander has said, but there's a foundation to this conversation. There's a part of this conversation that I witnessed that maybe they didn't witness, and because I was there earlier, then I had that experience. It was a real experience. You know, they're not just talking about weeding out white supremacists and nationalists in policing today because they just went there. I happen to have friends in Pittsburgh, and I remember when the Pittsburgh Black Police Association was one of the first Black police associations to join the Black Police Association. I still remember Brother Daniels, who was a Pittsburgh police officer, and the issues that they were confronting in 1970 and 1969 and 1975. I remember Freeman and them in the Vanguard Justice Society, and Pete France and Barry Powell and all them in the Vanguard Justice Society in Baltimore. So And as much as I agree with you, I don't know if I'd say 99%, but maybe 94, maybe 94, 95%. But I stood in roll call and watched and heard officers say that I want to get me one tonight. And they wasn't talking about a drink. They was talking about shooting someone. And they was clear about that too. So that element was, I'm not in law enforcement now, even though I work very closely on some of the issues, but that was an element that existed in the National Black Police Association, which I was a part of, in our local organization. We were raising those issues in 1970, in 1971, 1974, 1975, 1976. We were raising those issues. We were talking about the racism and the Klan being members of. So that was something that was a part of it. So you can't deny it. Not only that, let me give you a history lesson, and maybe you all know this, maybe you don't. But prior to 1961, black officers couldn't arrest white people in this country because black folk were only 3/5 of a human being. We were also relegated to only working in black communities. When I joined the police force in 1970 and 1969, they had just integrated police cars. Because there was a segregated society, and so the police department was segregated. So when they integrated, that meant that black officers and white officers could work together. They were actually still in 1970, there were still white officers who refused to work with black officers. So some of what you are talking about is very real. It's no question about it. But there's a reason why that exists now. And so that failure to provide equality of service, equity of service, it is based in the fact of the problems that existed in our society that also resonated and manifested themselves in the police departments that we worked in. And it's very real. And what happened is that we didn't see the change. My brother was talking about community policing and the chief too, and I agree. I was sitting in Lansing, Michigan in 1984 in a hotel there.
Now, Mr. Hampton, this is a talk show, Mr. Hampton. This is a talk show. Well, this is a talk show, Mr. Hampton. So
I'm gonna make my point and then I'm gonna move on. But I'm just saying that I was there and I understood the tenets of community police, and the police departments and police leaders had to been sincere. We probably about implementing and carrying out the tenets of community policing, we probably wouldn't have been at this juncture because we've been here before. And that's not to say that what you're talking about is not real, it's very real. And I'm always optimistic. I mean, I think you have to be if you're going to be in this business, but we also have to understand who shoulders we stand on and what the issues were that put us in the position that we find ourselves in today. Because if we don't, then we can't move to solutions.
So I'm glad you said about community, right? So if we talk about police department and community engagement, I think that word community engagement has been stretched a lot. It's kind of like, what does community engagement for police officers and law enforcement look like? How important it is, Shorter, for the community engagement, and what does community engagement to you look like in law enforcement?
I think that's a $1 million. I think it looks different in every situation due to social, educational, economic, and cultural circumstances. There are three groups of people that police officers encounter on a daily basis, and people don't look at this from the other side of the lens. You have the upper class, you have the middle class, and you have the less fortunate. I don't call them lower class because, like Mr. Hampton said, we were once considered no class. So I'll say the less fortunate. But I would ask the audience, what two groups of people do they think rebuff the police the most? And I'm gonna give them the answer, and it's the upper class and those less fortunate, and it's because of stigma and labeling that's within their cultures, right? So the haves don't want police to come around because it creates a stigma or a situation where there's something wrong. It changes the scenario of what they're in. The less fortunate don't want relations with the police because of the stigma that's been placed on police, rightfully so, in some of the ways that they destroy the communities. And that's why I really push hard for community policing, because I'm part of the problem that has caused a lot of the issues in Baltimore City. So a lot of the community events that I participate in is to restore that relational equity in the communities. Policing has gone from it needs to change from transactional to relational. So transactional policing is short term, and it's about going from call to call. But relational policing is geared towards long term relationships. So when it also responds, the relational transaction should be, how can I help this person or family? Why was I called here? Is there anything I can do to get this person outside help, right? And a lot of times, law enforcement officers aren't trained in relational policing. They're trained in transactional policing. And because of that, the transaction is short term, it doesn't have any merit, and it doesn't mean anything. So easy things, things that come easy, people just fail to realize that it has no meaning, it has no merit to it. They don't last. Look at easy money, it comes and goes. So an easy transaction, it comes and goes, and a person feels like, well, why did I even call you? And we got to get out of that. Why did I call you? We must go back to or increase to relational policing. Someone has a lot of background noise too. I don't know who.
So, Chief Lando, I'm going to ask you this question also, because you being the new chief of Frederick, we have been using the word community engagement, diversity. How does community engagement look to you, especially in Frederick right now?
So for me, it has to be authentic. I think, following 2014, around that time, you started seeing police departments really push out what they call community policing. And it would be, it would be these one-off events. Like we would do a toy giveaway, or we would do a, coffee with a cop or an ice cream event. And those are nice. Don't get me wrong. I mean, those are nice to do. But when I say they have to be meaningful and authentic, we need programs that are going to really allow our police officers and our community members to build relationships based on trust. And that's not a one-off thing. That's not something you do with a one-time event. I think that right now I'm kind of in that period where I'm assessing what's going on in Frederick. And I have to tell you that so far, I've been very impressed with the programs that they have in Frederick, and how the officers really, they really care about taking care of the community. Right now, we're looking. Just today, I was on some calls about looking at a pre-arrest diversion program, so to keep people who really need services out of jail. Looking at responding to people in crisis, so we're not handling that with taking someone to jail when what they really need is help. And the officers are all in on those, and that doesn't happen overnight. That takes the culture of the organization has to foster that type of thing. I'm very positive about what I've seen so far in Frederick, but that's not the same all over the country. And no matter what programs you're doing, there's always room for improvement. But I think that the most important thing is that we can't say we did this or we did that. We check the box, so we're community oriented. That's up to the community to decide if their police department is community oriented. So that's, I think, the other thing that we've left out of the equation for a long time is when we come into a community, asking them, what do you see community policing look like? For instance, in some neighborhoods, us going into the schools would be a really big deal. It would be really important. In other neighborhoods, they might not want the police in the schools. So it's really formulating our programs and our initiatives around the wants and needs of those specific communities. It's not a cookie cutter. There's no cookie cutter answer.
Thank you for that. So I'm glad you said that about different communities. I'm gonna let Mr. Hampton answer. Mr. Hampton, I'm gonna let you answer this question now. Don't go back. Don't give me no history stories now, Mr. Hampton. But I ask you this question. When you hear the word cultural relevance, what does that mean to you? In law enforcement, cultural relevance.
Cultural relevance for law enforcement means that it can mean, I think it means a variety of things. It means that you had to understand the idiosyncrasies of the community. You had to understand who lives in the community. You had to understand why people live in certain communities, why they don't live in other communities. And police officers have a role to play in that process. That's, one of the things that the example to me is that the addition of women in law enforcement, and women came into law enforcement. They brought a different philosophical approach, but they also brought a very practical approach. Men had a tendency to swell up their chest and play Superman. Women didn't operate like that, so they would handle situations. But it wasn't because women wasn't in law enforcement. Matter of fact, have been in law enforcement. Matter of fact, women were required to have degrees when men were not required to have degrees to be in law enforcement. So the cultural relevance to me that your force in the work that you're doing and how you're doing your work recognizes the people that you're doing it for. Because police departments don't work for themselves, they work for the citizens that they serve and the residents of the community. So they have to understand and be equipped to deal with that. And that's what the cultural relevancy is talking about. But it's something that I believe for myself. It's something that you just don't do when you go into training. And I don't like to use the word training academy. I like to use the word education academy. It's not something that you get at the education academy. It's something that is relevant throughout your whole entire police career. Simple reason is the communities change, and the force has to be able to deal with the changes that are occurring in our community, whether it's gentrification, whether it's what we're going through now with COVID, in terms of schools and those things. You have to be relevant in terms of what it is that's going on in order for you to do your job.
Thank you for that. So as I have mentioned before, I work in Baltimore, in Baltimore with the police department, and I would have to say that when I work with the officers that I work with, actually a lot of people know the officer, right? So Chief Lando, I'm going to put you on the hot seat right now. So I am very involved in the community, and I must say I don't know any of the officers, not one. And I've seen numerous of them into the community, and I've seen them numerous of times. If you don't say nothing to them, they won't say nothing to you. So how important it is for the community, law enforcement, to be involved in the community, because I know, and Shorter can vouch for this, that having a community connection, they need to know the officers that patrol their streets. Not when I call you or not when you pull me over. So how are you going to change that trajectory of officers actually connecting with the community so we can know who that officer is? So how can you get the law enforcement involved in the community with that?
I mean, I think that comes down to role modeling behavior and, walking the walk. So, one of the things, and I can't, I can tell you what my plans will be in Frederick. I can't speak to what happened before I got there. But I can tell you that one of the things that I saw previously in my other job is that same exact issue where there was a disconnect, right? The officers and community members felt like they didn't know each other for a number of reasons. I mean, one of those reasons is, the officers spend the majority of their time what we call chasing the radio. And so we've kind of gotten away from that, getting out and walking around, because of our numbers where we're at. Right out of their roll call, they're out there answering calls, back-to-back calls. We weren't giving them that time. So one of the things I was very intentional about was leading by example, getting out there with officers, myself meeting the community, and then making those introductions with the officers. And I feel like officers need to feel supported, and they're looking to us as the leaders for how to conduct themselves out in the street. So if you work for an organization where that environment isn't fostered, where we value just answering radio calls, like Commander Shorter said, that transactional policing, then that's the type of officer you're going to get. But when you have a chief and deputy chiefs and captains and lieutenants, and all the way down to the rookie officer, where that is supported and encouraged to get out there and meet the community, it totally changes the dynamic, and you start to have that relational policing that Shorter talked about. I think that's so important. So already, I'm in my 4th day, but already, yesterday I walked around with the downtown lieutenant, and I said, I got to get out of this office. I got to meet some people. Let's walk around. And I think that when officers see the chief of police and the deputy chiefs, and when they see them doing that, they realize like this is the type of organization. That's what's expected in this organization. And so for me, it's just all about role modeling that behavior, and that's what I intend to do.
Thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask Mr. Shorter, Mr. Hampton, that you worked in the DC Police Department, and Shorter, the Baltimore. Having officers that are diverse, a lot of communities will say, "How can you relate to me? You're not Black or Hispanic," or how important it is in one. I work with all Black officers, so how important is Shorter and Mr. Hampton to have a diversity in law enforcement? Because Chief Lando, I'm going to ask you how many Black and brown officers you have in your force, or if you know that yet. But Shorter and Hampton, how is it important to have a diversity in the law enforcement to connect with the community?
Go ahead, boss. You older than me, age before.
Mr. Hampton, he said, "Go ahead, boss. You got it."
I'll take the question. I mean, I think that diversity is fantastic. I think it's necessary. As a matter of fact, that's what we were just talking about. That's what we were just talking about when we were talking about, in some degree, when we were talking about cultural relevancy in terms of the department itself. What is a department of reflective of the community it serves? And I'm just not talking about Black and brown and white. I'm talking about the other people who live in our community, people with disabilities, a variety of other people in the community. So we need to be and should be concerned about that, and we can do that. One of the things that I think is that most chiefs have these advisory councils. You need to have representatives on your advisory council that should make up and look like the communities that you serve. But the other side of this is that sometimes you can't control it. And if you can't control it, then you need to be doing the kind of things that take a deep dive into what it is that's going on in the community. And that can be done by community advice and counsel in relationship to what it is that the department is doing. The other side of the thing that I think is important that I wanted to say was that if you think that recruiting individuals of color in your police department to represent the community somehow or another deals with the fundamental foundation of systemic racism in our society and in our institutions, then that's not going to level the playing field. You have to dig down deep and deal with the culture and the institutional things that happen in the agency. I just want to give you a quick example. When I joined the police department, African Americans made up 19%. When I left the police department, we were rapidly moving toward 50% of the police department. Well, that was because we had a series of Black chiefs for about 12 years. And one of their main objectives was to see and move the balance of the police department. The balance of the police department didn't eliminate the systemic racism because the Black chief did not control those factors outside the police department that he had nothing to do with. And so you have to be knowledgeable of that and be also rein in your expectations about what it is that's going to take place when you do these kind of things. The changes that take place don't the changes that need to take place in the department don't change because you add 100 black police officers or 100 brown police officers. They're not going to change because officers do what other people tell them to do. And if you want to really get down to the nitty gritty, then you have to start doing the things that's going to challenge the culture, the systemic culture of the organization, as well as what the makeup to the other things that go along with that. So it's absolutely important, but it's not the answer to the problem.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Shorter.
Okay, so when you talk about diversity, I think it's very important and critical that you also mention equity and inclusion. If you don't include equity and inclusion with diversity, you're really killing yourself. So I think before an agency can talk about how did they the makeup of the agency or if they a reflection of the community, they have to focus internally first. So you have to have diversity, equity, and inclusion internally before you can even begin to talk about diversity within the community. A police department should develop strong coalitions with community, not just to the supporters, because that's what most police chiefs, that's what most community relationships, and that's what most community engagements focus on towards the supporters. Many times, they fail to garner a relationship with those that are oppositional. I'm a fanatic of Robert Peel, who was the father of modern day policing, and two of his prominent principles summarize the police are the people and the people are the police, and that the police receive their authority from the public and are dependent upon public approval. So without all of those things, if I can't trust you, if I don't know you, I'm never going to give you I'm never going to trust you. I'm never going to want you in my home. I'm never going to want you in my community. So unless you can develop those relationships with those people who actually control the community, you can be diverse internally all you want. You can say my department is made up of 100 black or 100 white or 100 women or 100 LGBTQ, but if you don't have that relationship with the community, none of it matters. So it's very important that you develop relationships before you start talking about diversity, because diversity to me is a word, that's a description that people want to just bounce around to say, well, look, we diverse. But where's the relationship? Where's the trust? Where's the reverence? If you have none of that, it's just a farce, because people can see, most people that live in communities can see through the checkbox that the chief mentioned earlier. It's a checkbox to say I have 50% of my agency because I have a city that's 60% or 70% African American, or Latino, or Indian. It doesn't matter if they don't trust you, and if they don't know that they can, walk up to you and have a conversation, as you mentioned earlier. None of that even matters. I think before you talk about diversity, you must have a relationship. And just one thing I like to the chief that people often say. Communities and agencies and municipalities focus on downtown. So I would urge you, Chief, to go out into the outlying areas, right? Downtown is going to take care of itself, right? The outlying areas are where you will get the bang for the buck, because those relationships that you develop will come from your outlying communities. And like I said, downtown will take care of itself.
I'm glad that Shorter mentioned that. Chief Lando, you know that the outside of Frederick is very delicate. We have Sheriff Chuck Jenkins that has made a rift in our community, especially Latinx community. When you talk about the trust of the community, how are you going to work with building that in the community, especially the rift that Chuck Jenkins has already opposed in our city?
First of all, I just wanted to comment on Commander's comment. I appreciate that comment very much, and I think that's definitely not unique. I think to Frederick. I think a lot of times we tend to put a lot of effort and focus on our business district, our centers of commerce, and we forget about the neighborhoods where some of the people are really struggling and going through the most issues. So please know that is definitely on the forefront of my mind. I was actually out today with two of the captains getting the tour of the area outside of downtown, and I really look forward to starting to meet people and make those relationships. And I think again it goes back to what I said earlier, it is about having those relationships. That is so important. It is about showing up. and it is about expecting your officers and those who work under you to do the same thing. Again, and not to keep going to the past, but since I've only been with Frederick for 4 days, I feel like I should tell you a little bit about the experiences I had in the past. When I inherited the precinct that I did, we had no relationship with the schools. We had no relationship with the faith communities. And we didn't have a very good relationship with some of the businesses out in the neighborhoods. Like I said, there was just this disconnect. So the programs that we developed were specifically with those groups. For instance, we had a barbershop on the corner in an area that was known for gun violence, and kids were afraid to walk down the street. And so we went into the barbershop and we met with the owner, and we said, what can we do? How can we help? And we ended up in conjunction with some community partners creating a program where every Wednesday night our police officers would call out of service. They'd come off the street and they'd go into the barbershop and have dinner with the kids in the neighborhood. And some of the kids, it was a reading initiative, and some of the kids who hadn't learned to read yet, the officers would go in there and read books with them. Some people might say that's touchy feely. I thought that was a phenomenal program because it helped send a message that we were involved in the community. It helped these young kids see the police officers as role models. And then when those officers showed up at the homes, or after school for a fight in the street where these kids were there, they automatically saw those officers and they felt safe and they felt comfortable because they knew that those officers had their best interest in mind. So that's just one small example of kind of my philosophies on how we community police. We do what the community feels will be beneficial. We build those relationships, and then in times of crisis or in times where things aren't going great, we already have those relationships established. And if you're only doing that in one neighborhood or in your business district where your tourists or your visitors come, we're really doing in the end, we're doing the community and we're doing ourselves a disservice. When I left Pittsburgh, I was at the point where when something major happened, when there was a critical incident or something bad happened, I was able to pick up the phone and call any one of 100 different community members or community leaders because we'd worked so hard at building those relationships that we were able to prevent some major things from turning into a crisis or a media event because we had those open lines of communication. So I think that's what it is about. It is about being present. It is about being available and being an open communicator. I will go to any church. I will go to any business. I will go anywhere and meet with people because I want them to know that their police chief and thus their officer are truly involved in the community and are available to them.
Thank you for that. So I could not go without asking this question.
I get two in a row?
No, it's for Mr. Hampton first, and then all of you guys are going to answer. Mr. Hampton, don't give me no history story now. So the question is about Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. It's a hot topic. It's in Annapolis right now. It's looking to be repealed. I had Gabriel Aceverio on my show last Thursday. He is the one that actually brought that bill forward to repeal. And I think it would only be fair if law enforcement was to give their side of why Leobor should be repealed or should it stay. I know I spoke with the officer today. He's very concerned if it is taken away because of how it can help officers internally. So, Mr. Hampton, how do you feel about the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights?
I'm familiar with it and I'm opposed to it because I think police officers ought to be held to a higher standard, not a different standard. And things like the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, our police officers now, just one thing, if they're involved in an incident, they can wait 20 days before somebody from the department can interview them or something. It may be even more than that. there are other cities that had similar policies, and they've been able uh, to eliminate those things. No, if one of if a citizen walked out and commit a crime, they not afforded 20 days. They got to answer up and lawyer up right then and there. They don't have 20 days. And I don't know what it is that they're fearful of. Because if you go out and do your job every single day, like we did, like they do, then what is it that you have to be afraid of? If you do something wrong, you still have, you're still innocent until proven guilty. So this whole idea that there's a piece of legislation set up to protect you from what I don't understand. So I don't agree with I don't agree with it. I think it's part of the old culture, law enforcement, and something that they were able to do with management to buttonhole management to take some controls away from management as it related to what they do every single day. I don't agree to it, and I hope that the legislature is able to change it and ultimately eliminate it because it's bad business. And again, what do they have to be? We already know. We already know that when the officer is involved in an incident, they have protections that the average citizen don't even have, that they don't even have and will not be afforded. Citizens. So what is it that they want? When we look at the prosecution rate across the country of officers who get involved in incidents, in no way does it compare to the prosecution rate for particularly black and brown people when they commit equal or similar incidents. So I don't know what it is that they're afraid of.
Okay, thank you for that. Shorter, how do you feel about the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights?
Well, I think that a full repeal will create like a hedgehog, a policy throughout the state of Maryland based on specific municipality rules and regulations. So, for instance, a total repeal, Charles County will be different from Baltimore County, will be different from Baltimore City, who will be different from Frederick, and so on. So it creates a framework that agencies must follow. Now, police departments, yeah, nationwide haven't kept up with the systemic issues of the nation, so some of it needs to be repealed. It's not 20 days; it's 10. And people don't realize like a law enforcement officer goes through a lot daily. Mr. Hampton can relate to that. And it's not about being afraid to face the music when you commit a crime, right? Or don't commit a crime. Many times, officers throughout the community, when you're doing your job, and I can attest to this because I've had many complaints filed, when you do your job just a little too well, people in the community just don't want you in the community that aren't doing the right things. Some people that commit nefarious activities often file complaints against police officers to get them removed from the community, and that's the first thing that they ask for. I just want them out of the community. So it should be a full repeal. No, I don't think it should be a full repeal. To me, that LEOBR mirrors the U.S. Constitution for law enforcement officers. Imagine if every state had their own United States Constitution singularly. Every state will operate differently. So should it be a full repeal? No. And it's mainly to safeguard against investigation interrogations that could lead to disciplinary actions, demotion, or dismissals. It doesn't prohibit or prevent any of them officers from being fired, suspended, or demoted after being found guilty in any tribunal or court. So a full repeal would just create such it goes back to be careful what you ask for because you just might get it. And to have one county or one city operate totally differently from another, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I disagree with a full repeal, but there are amendments that should occur. So like the 20-day waiting period is actually 10. And should that be repealed? Yeah, that should be repealed. Should you be forced to give a statement right away? No, I don't think you should be forced to give a statement right away because it's a life changing or life altering event that may or may not have occurred. And a person on the street that commits a crime, they can ask for a lawyer. And you still get your right to due process. And to totally repeal the law enforcement bill of rights, you would remove some of the due processes that police officers have, but you still would have those same rights under the civil penalties or procedures, whatever community or municipality that you work in.
Thank you for that, Shorter. And Chief Lando, how do you feel about the law enforcement bill of rights?
I would say I'm pretty much in line with Commander Shorter. I think that so here's I want to be very clear. If you are unethical as a police officer, if you are dirty, if you lie, if you steal, if you use excessive force, you should be fired. And so I want to make sure that no one listening tonight thinks that me saying that officers should have due process in any way means that I think they should get off scot-free if they've done something wrong. If you're an unethical police officer, there's a saying that no one dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop because they make us all look bad. So with that being said, we also have to pay some deference to the fact that we are asking men and women to go out there and deal with all of society's woes, right? Every day we throw a million different things at them, and they are human beings, and they are going to make mistakes. And if we don't afford them some level of due process, how do we ever expect them to go out and do their job? How do we expect to increase or improve recruitment if we basically just strike this whole bill down and let municipalities, kind of make up their own thing? So I do think that there's room for improvement. I don't think that we should get rid of the whole Bill of Rights, but I do think that cooler heads should prevail. I think law enforcement, community leaders, legislators need to come to the table and go through each of the points of the Bill of Rights and some of these other bills that are being introduced and talk about, the pros and the cons and the unintended consequences. Just yesterday I was made aware of the House bill that's moving through right now in Maryland. I'm still trying to convert from my Pennsylvania brain to my Maryland brain. But
this is the Trust Act. Is it the Trust Act bill?
I want to say it's 670, House Bill 670. But some of the things in there will put police officers' lives in danger. And so the unintended consequence that you could potentially see from that is police officers only doing the bare minimum because if they go above and beyond, there are things that put their lives and their livelihoods in danger. And at the end of the day, everyone wants to be safe, right? Communities want to be safe, and police officers want to go home to their families safe. So to kind of sum it up, if you're an officer that goes out there and you do the wrong thing and you are a bad cop, I would never want to see something put into place where those types of officers are protected. But we also have to realize that the majority of the officers do go out there every day and do the right thing. And when we put them in situations sometimes that don't always go as planned, we have to make sure that their rights are protected and that they have some level of due process. And that's why I have a problem with just saying throw the whole thing out.
Yeah.
I have a question. So what you just got through saying is that if a bad officer, like using the term you use, an officer who is bad and need to be fired, President Bill Act, he still had 10 days, right? Before he can talk. Right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
You cut off, Mr.
So I'm saying a bad officer, like you described, commits an infraction, dirty, do whatever. He still has 10 days, right? A bad officer. And a good officer got 10 days too, right?
I didn't understand that because you were cutting.
So he's saying that if a bad officer, do they still get 10 days to get their story straight?
Because the Bill of Rights don't allow you to fine right outright. They still get 10 days, right?
Okay, so I get it now. I understand what you're saying now. Thanks, Shorter, for typing that in the comments. No, so what I'm saying is that's one of the things. That is one of the points that we need to sit down and look at. That I'm not saying that the whole Bill of Rights is good, and I'm not saying the whole Bill of Rights is bad. I'm saying we need to go through it and look at what's reasonable and what's not reasonable and come up with a solution. So for something like that, then yes, we should probably look at changing the time period that someone has to give a statement. I agree with that. What I'm saying is to just wholesale throw out the whole document, the whole bill, is going to create issues. So,
but I understand what you're saying. But let me say this: there are 18,000, almost 18,000 police departments in America, and each and every one of them have different policies. But there's no Bill of Rights that is articulated the way the Maryland Bill of Rights is articulated in the whole country.
Shorter, would you like to input on that?
Well, from my understanding, it's 16 different states who have some sort of the LEOBR. Maryland was the first, right?
That's
so
right.
The first is always going to be different than the last. And from, I guess, the mistakes that Maryland made, others built on it or took away from it. So Mr. Hampton, to your question, I'll just answer from my point of view. So an officer is accused of an incident. So your take is he automatically should be fired. No questions asked, no ifs, ands, and buts. And I agree with the chief. He should the time frame to give.
No. If
Mr. Hampton, let him finish. Mr. Hampton,
but I want to correct him because I don't think he ought to be fired. I think he ought to be given due process like every other citizen get due process.
Okay.
And police officers get due process too. So that's what I expect. But I don't think he ought to be fired. That's what the chief said that. But I think he ought to get due process. But I don't think that he or she ought to get anything that any other citizen doesn't get. Because I don't think that I think police officers ought to be held to a high standard, not a different standard. And I understand what they do every day. I did it for 24 years.
So all I'm saying is, so I'm with the chief. I agree that the time frame to give a statement should be modified or amended, right? I agree with him on that. And I think that's what you're saying as well. And that's part of the due process that police officers are afforded. But he shouldn't be just thrown away. He shouldn't be compared to somebody on the street because what they do is different, right? So doctors, lawyers, health professionals, they have malpractice insurance, right? When they are accused of a wrong, they have a process as well. So the LEOBR is just our process. It's no different than any other process for any other profession who should be held at a higher standard.
But I think police officers ought to be. I wouldn't disagree with police officers having liability insurance because we wouldn't be taking my money or citizens' money as a qualified immunity and paying them out of tax dollars. They could have insurance and then they would be protected for their insurance.
Well, maybe that's something that can be included.
Just like a doctor or a lawyer. Yeah, I don't have no problem with that.
Right. Some hospitals pay the malpractice insurance. Some law firms pay the malpractice insurance for their employees.
I don't have a problem with that. But that has to be agreed upon between the individual and the institution. If a city, we didn't, the legislators agreed in the development of qualified immunity that said that happened. But if you ask me, should my tax dollars go to pay to somebody who commits a crime against somebody? I don't think my tax dollars ought to go to that because as a matter of fact, I'm getting violated twice. I'm getting violated because of police brutality. Then I'm getting violated because they taking my tax dollars and paying a citizen who was violated as a result of the errand police officer.
Thank you for that, Mr. Hampton. So Chief Lando had to get. He got to get his cord for his computer or his battery. So I'm gonna wait for him, and we're almost finished, guys. I think you guys did a great job.
Thank you. I hope it was informative to your audience just to see different points of view from an OG to someone in the middle that's on his way out to someone that's on his way in.
What does OG mean? brother.
Original G.
Huh?
Original G.
What does that mean?
That means you're an old timer who has more history and education than the chief or
Can you just say I'm a veteran?
You could be a veteran. You could be whatever you want.
I'm a veteran. That's what I am. And I got history. I got history, and I got history that entangles with both of you all.
And I
you do. I'm actually going to bring it full circle.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Go ahead, Chief Lando.
I just want to, to what Mr. Hampton said, is something I wanted to comment on earlier about history. I think that it's really important, and some academies do this, not all of them, but I think that it's really important to have a history lesson in the police academy, because one of the things I noticed is you get these 22-year-old police officers that come out on the street, shiny badge. Yeah, shiny badge. Like, I'm here, I'm going to save the world. And they go out into communities that look very different from communities they grew up in. Right. And they're like, I'm going to save the world. And they don't understand when they aren't received with open arms. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's not until, and I can tell you this firsthand, because when we did the procedural justice training in Pittsburgh, we built a whole module in there about the history. And, one of the things we said is, you're 22 years old, right? You don't remember, certainly don't remember, but there was a time in this city where people who are alive today and you are responding to calls to their houses were treated differently systemically and institutionally based on the color of their skin. So
like tell the truth.
Right. So when you're shocked and surprised that the police aren't welcomed in certain neighborhoods, you have to understand there is a historical piece to this. And I think that's really important to address that. And I know Mr. Hampton touched on it earlier, and I just wanted to,
Thank you. It's called cultural relevance. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly. We had a young man here in DC that was taking police officers, and he's still doing it. They spend a day with him talking about the history of policing in this country and in this city in particular, and then they take him over to the African American History Museum, History and Culture Museum, so that there's some things that they just don't know. Like you say, these 22-year-old police officers, they don't know anything about that yet. That is the foundation on which some individuals in our community, how they see, that's the lens they see policing in. So they need to understand that.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Chipana.
I was going to say, I mean, that's just that's not even a policing thing. That's just human behavior, right? Like, I set foot in the door on Monday at a brand new police department. Let me tell you, before I start making decisions and before I start changing anything, I'm going to learn about the history of this department and about the history of this city, because if I don't do that, no matter what I do is not going to be received well, even if it is with the best intentions. So I kind of draw that parallel there.
No, I understand.
So that will lead me to my final question. What do you, and this is a question from the audience, what would you consider a good police officer and a good role model in a police officer? Is that a hard question? Is that a trick question? I don't know.
Me? I think that's it.
It's for Mr. Lando. It's for Mr. Lando.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
I didn't even know it was for me. Honestly, I think two things immediately come to mind. If you can go to work every day and say that you treated the community like you would expect a member of your own family to be treated in that same situation, then that's a good police officer, right? So I'm not saying we don't arrest people, right? If your brother, sister, mother, father did something, and in that same situation, you would expect them to get arrested. So that's just, when I make decisions on a daily basis, that's kind of my test, right? Would I want my family member, or would I expect my family member to be treated the same way in that situation? And then the other thing I would say is, advice I give to all the new officers is just be human, right? I think a lot of times we as police officers are seen as robots. And we go home to families, and we have problems just like everybody else, and we have concerns and we have struggles, and sometimes we bring that to work even though we don't want to. And so my biggest advice is just be a human being, right? If you know, I'll never forget one officer who's a phenomenal officer, right? I mean, he worked hard, he was ethical. But I was with him at a community event, one of the community events that I brought him to start, getting those relationships built. And a little old lady went up to him, a little church lady, and she went over and she went to go give him a hug. And he backed up like this. And I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "It's the hands that kill." That's what he said. It's the hands that kill. Well, in the police academy, that's something we train, right? You don't let anyone touch you as a police officer because it's the hands that kill. And I said, maybe be a little more human in this situation. Like, I don't think she means you any harm. Give her a hug, right? So we give her a hug. We laugh about it, but that's how, like, sometimes we train officers to be robots. And so I think that we need to kind of take a look at how we do our training. And so my advice to officers would be, when you're out on the street, just be a human being. That's all the community wants.
So I would like to bring it back full circle. So Chief Lando, we're definitely gonna have to have coffee downtown. And
out in the community.
We can walk around the community. That's great too. And if you don't know, Baltimore County is the biggest county, the next biggest county to Frederick. So I would definitely encourage you to definitely connect with Shorter here and see how you guys can, collaborate, and maybe he can, you guys can collaborate in Frederick in some ways. And Mr. Hampton here is definitely historical. And if you need some history about police department, he's in DC. So DC's 45 minutes away. So hopefully that you guys can connect and build a relationship and make Frederick's already a great place, but also just to bring that trust to our law enforcement that Frederick is missing, and bring that connection. So hopefully you guys can connect in some way. That's why I put you guys together in my strategic ways. So if anything you guys would like to add before we get off, I'm more than welcome. Anybody can go first.
I'd like to say that I just want to thank you in the audience. And what is to me one of the fatal flaws of any law enforcement officer is not only knowing the who, the what, and the how are the people that they're going to spend 80% of their time with daily, right? They need to learn who's culturally relevant and those who merely want to be relevant. That in itself will help them understand who in the community they can go to. And as the chief said, everyone should be treated as if it's your mother, as if it's your sister, your brother, your father. How would you want them to be treated? A young man, I'm going to end it with this. A young man that I mentored in one of our camps that we put on, he saw me out of uniform. So, hey, Jeff, how you doing? Hi, sir. But then one day he saw me in his uniform, and I wanted to talk to him. He's like, hey, who are you? And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, I don't know who you are. So I had a conversation with him. He was like, it's just something that's like you have a mask on when you have your uniform on. So it really showed me that we must change the law enforcement internally, how we connect with people, how we treat people, how we talk to people. Because him saying I had a mask on said that the initial relationship that I had with him wasn't really strong enough. So I felt like I failed somewhere along the line in developing a stronger relationship with him. And it was my goal to get him to see me differently. He became an explorer. Hopefully he'll be able to graduate, become a cadet and graduate to become a police officer. But that was my goal in changing his perception, because perceptions are realities. And whether we want to accept it or not, people live in reality and not perceptions.
Thank you for that. Anybody else would like to add an ending?
I just real quick want to follow up on Mr. Shorter. What he said is so true about the in uniform and not in uniform. When we did our youth engagement in schools, we would go in schools and build relationships with kids. We did it very much by trial and error, right? Our fatal flaw initially was we all went in uniform. So 10 police officers met with 10 kids. And the fear that these kids had of us in uniform, it shut the whole session down. So we went back a week later, and none of us wore uniforms, and we just brought food with us, and we had lunch with them.
Oh, you muted. You muted.
The relationships that came out of that were just phenomenal. So he hit the nail on the head. That whole, we act, or we are perceived very differently sometimes just by the uniform.
And I would like to add that the audience said that this was very informative. Go ahead, Mr. Hampton.
Yeah, I know I was taking a note of it. I'm being sincere. I didn't have that. I didn't have that as an issue. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I lived up the street from the police precinct I worked in. I walked to work. I wore my uniform. They in the building I lived in, they knew I was a police officer. So I never had that. I see people now, grown folk now, who still call me Officer Hampton because relationship they knew me. I took a page out of the book Warrior Police, but the book wasn't even written when I was doing this. It's just that I had an idea because I had read and studied some stuff around policing before I joined the police force because I wanted to be knowledgeable about what it was I was stepping into, and I didn't want to be naive either. And I believed what Peel said. They teach Peel in the police academy. They don't teach Peel in the police academy. So I believed it because I read it first. So I resisted a lot of the stuff that they talked about in the police academy because what I did believe is that as a police officer, I was a part of the community, and where I got the power that I had as a police officer from the community that I served. And so in order for me to have that power, I also had to share it with the very people that I lived with and was around. And I walked the footbeat for 8 years in my community, and I lived on my footbeat. So, and they knew that. And that was very intentional. So that wasn't my story. And I'm not dispelling or criticizing you all's story. I'm just saying that wasn't my story because it just didn't happen that way. And by me being a very visible person in my community and being head of the Black Police Association in Washington, D.C., I was very outspoken and very upfront. And the community was the people that I had to deal with. And I got support from them too, because I couldn't depend on police officers to support me, because the ones that wasn't afraid of me in terms of what I stood for in my boldness, there were those who were intimidated by me and didn't want to be around me. I mean, those things happen. I'm just being honest and truthful. But it didn't sway me in terms of what I had to do as a police officer, though.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. It was such a pleasure. I commend all of you for Mr. Hampton for what you've done in the police department, what you're doing in your organization right now for law enforcement, for Black law enforcement. Shorter, always much love, and definitely keep doing what you're doing. And Chief Lando, I am excited about you being in our community, and I'm pretty sure we're going to cross paths. So thank you. Have a great night. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great night, guys.